Well, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Suzanne Strasser and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, CMMC Compliance Roadmap, Getting Ready for Certification. We know that navigating the path to CMMC certification can feel overwhelming, especially for small businesses, and that's why we're here, to walk you through a clear step-by-step roadmap to get your organization CMMC ready. We'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for promoting this event today. We have numerous MEP and Apex accelerators co-sponsoring our webinar today. Your local Apex accelerators are available to bridge the gap between your business and the government. Apex accelerators are here to assist you with local, state, and federal contracting. MEPs provide tools and resources to help U.S. manufacturers succeed. Each center connects manufacturers with government agencies, universities, and research facilities and trade associations that foster growth and innovation. Contact your local Apex Accelerator or MEP for more information on how they can help your business succeed. So today, I'm joined by two seasoned experts, love that word, Scott Dawson, President of Core Business Solutions. Scott's worked with thousands of companies on cybersecurity and compliance. Hi, Scott. And also Rick Crick, Director of Security Solutions here at Core. Rick has led numerous CMMC and NIST 800-171 engagements and brings deep technical expertise. Thanks, guys.
Glad to be here, Suzanne.
So let's start today with the most pressing question on everyone's mind: why now? So the CMC rules are finalized, but many businesses are still unsure when to act. So what to do now? So Scott, why should small businesses begin by preparing for CMMC now, even before contract requirements are in place?
Yeah, great question, Suzanne. We've been asking that question for a time now, and we're now in 2025 at the beginning of the year, almost springtime, and we're expecting the next few steps to kick the contract rules off for CMMCs. But I think the big picture is that soon CMMC will start to become a requirement for participating as a prime contractor or subcontractor within any defense project, and those requirements will flow down throughout the supply chain. I mentioned that we're kind of in the process of seeing regulations being published. Last December, there was a rule called the 32 CFR, and that specified that CMMC certifications can begin. So it outlined exactly what a certification entails, who's allowed to conduct the certifications, how appeals will work if there's something that is not agreed to, how recertification will work, etc. So it laid out in very lengthy detail how the CMMC program works, but it's not yet required because that's waiting for another regulation called 48 CFR, and that is expected later this year. And that will then authorize contract officers to begin to include CMMC in defense contracts. So then it will become a contractual or legal obligation to be certified if it's required for a contract that you're bidding on. So it's going to take a phased approach to implement this throughout the Defense Department, through all of the procurement areas within DoD. Probably take us all the way through 2028 before all of the contracts then include those requirements. And essentially what it will mean is, when CMMC is a requirement of a contract, you'll have to be fully certified in order to bid on that contract. And so you won't be qualified, should I say, to bid on contracts, be awarded contracts, unless you're fully certified. So now is the time when there are thousands of companies across the country learning the requirements, implementing the technical upgrades that are necessary, getting employees trained, securing their environment, There's a lot going on. It typically takes 12 to 24 months, unless there's a shortcut approach that you can take, and there are some that are very good way to handle it for small businesses. But if you're going to upgrade your network and get fully secure and prepared for certification, and then get yourself certified, it's generally going to be 1 to 2 year period of time. So if you're expecting to bid on contracts, say later this year or into next year, and you haven't begun, then you're already behind. So that's the urgency right now, Suzanne.
Great. So yeah, get it done early. All right. Yeah, thanks, Scott. That really gives us the sense of urgency. So, Rick, can you walk us through the timeline? What are the key phases of the rollout, and when should companies expect to see CMMC in their contracts?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, as Scott alluded to, there's a phased approach to this. Phase one for this year, 2025, most of this is still going to be self-assessment. There may be a few contracts that will require the CMMC Level 2 certification, but you still have a majority of them that will be requiring that self-assessment. Along with that self-assessment is an annual affirmation that you are meeting those particular requirements. So we have a phase two approach then.
Hey, Rick,
Hey.
let me pick up while I fix your
Yeah.
microphone. How about that? So as Rick was saying, it's a little hard to hear the microphone they're working on right now. But phase one is expected to start this year, where that would include CMMC level 1 requirements in relevant contracts, and those require self-assessments to be completed. And that's how you would be certified with a level 1 certification. Level 2 is more advanced. It's more of an investment because it's protecting more sensitive information called CUI, and that's expected to start arriving in contracts next year in 2026. And then those requirements will then flow through the various contracts and down through the supply chain in order to become official in all DoD contracts over the next few years.
Great. Okay, sorry about the volume, guys. We'll have Rick test it out here in a second. So that's really helpful, though. The timeline's really helpful, especially as, the contract landscape starts to shift. So, Scott, one other thing we've heard about is SPURS scoring. So can you explain why that's important and how it fits into a company's readiness for CMMC?
Yeah, everything we've talked about so far is related to the future as 48 CFR comes online and contracts begin seeing CMMC requirements. Today, there are no CMMC requirements. There's the possibility of getting certified. You can get certified, but you're not required to be certified as of the date of the recording of this webinar. But what you do have to do, and that's based on the DFARS regulations, is you have to conduct what's called a self-assessment and implement upload a score to indicate where are you in the preparation phase from zero preparation to 100%. Now, if you have all the NIST requirements, it's called, the standard is NIST SP 800-171. If you've implemented all the requirements effectively and you've self-assessed and you want to attest that you've met all the requirements, you'll have 110 points. There are 110 controls in NIST 800-171. If you're missing various controls, in other words, you're still working toward meeting that 100%, then your score would be less than 110, and it would be expected for the majority of companies that they're still in the process of implementation. So it wouldn't be surprising for a score to be 30 or 50 or 109, let's say, as companies are getting prepared. And all that the requirements are today is that you're in work. In other words, you're on the path toward implementation. That is not the same as being CMMC certified. CMMC certification has different requirements in it, and especially if you're looking at level 2 certification or level 3 certification, those require a third-party assessor to come and conduct an assessment to confirm and validate that you have implemented all those requirements. So with a level 2 or level 3, when you're CMMC certified, it's not a self-assessment; it's a third-party assessment. And so we want to be we want to distinguish between today's requirement, which is upload a SPURS score. That stands for Supplier Performance Risk System. It's a DoD system. In order to bid on contracts, you have to have a score, not a perfect score, but you have to have a score uploaded into the DoD database and updated annually. That's the current requirement. But in the near future, when it becomes contractually a requirement, that's when CMMC certification, full certification, will be required.
Great. Okay. That's good information. Thank you. Rick, do you want to test your microphone? Let's make sure we can hear you.
Yes, hopefully the technology is working now,
Great,
and it looks
okay.
like it is.
Perfect.
Got a thumbs
Yeah,
up.
it is, Rick. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So now that we understand the big picture and why timing matters, let's talk about where to begin. So the first real step on the CMMC roadmap is to identify gaps. That's true for most processes. So Rick, what's the difference between conducting a self-assessment and then bringing in a professional for a pre-assessment?
Great question. The self-assessments are those assessments, reviews of your cybersecurity posture in-house. So we're looking at our organizational systems, devices, all the requirements of the NIST 800-171 and the CMMC, those 110 requirements, to see if we're meeting those. Whereas when we're talking about a pre-assessment, you'll want to bring in a professional because not only are we looking at those 110, we are now going to be looking at the assessment objectives. And there's around 320 of those that we'll be delving into. So for your self-assessment, you would want to look at the NIST 800-171A, which is kind of a checklist that would help you walk through your self-assessment and be able to identify what those gaps are. But typically the pre-assessment would be those that we would look at as we're getting ready for that certification. So your self-assessment, you do in-house. Pre-assessments, you want to get a third party, maybe a C3PAO that you would enlist in order to help you identify where those gaps may be in that pre-assessment. So once again, you want to do that, especially if you're going to have CUI, that controlled unclassified information. That means that you're going to be looking at a level 2, or it could possibly be a level 3. Level 3 is going to be less prevalent. Only a handful of organizations would have that certification level required. So that's basically the difference.
Okay, great.
Hey,
That's
Rick, let me just make one
yeah.
point there, because I think we use the word assessment in a lot of different connotations in a lot of different ways. We
Yes.
talked about self-assessment, pre-assessment, and then there's certification assessment. So we don't want to confuse everyone. Self-assessment and pre-assessment are part of preparation.
Correct.
It's a way to evaluate how far along you are, or are you ready to then pay the fee that's going to be required for a formal CMMC certification by an external party. So you can have external parties, as Rick advised. Probably a good idea to have a C3PAO or a consulting company to conduct a pre-assessment. It's like a mock audit, if you will, right?
Yes.
A practice run through, just to confirm that you're fully ready and you're understanding the requirements fully, because there's a lot to it, and if you're not, all that technical, and you're not really familiar with government regulations, you can get lost in the words and maybe misunderstand something. So pre-assessments are really important, but that's not what gets you certified. That's the point I wanted to make.
Good point. Good distinction. Okay. So, Scott, what tools or resources are available to help companies kind of accurately identify their compliance gaps and understand where they're at?
Yeah, so if you don't want to pay for a pre-assessment by a third party, or maybe you want to do some more preparation yourself, then there are some free tools available for companies to download. One is on a website called Project Spectrum. The website is projectspectrum.io. And that is a DoD website that provides a lot of documentation and training and other resources that you can use to help prepare your company for certification. They also include templates and a SPURS calculator. So you remember earlier I mentioned that it's a point system to submit your SPURS score. Well, that calculator will help you to determine how many points you should then submit into your SPURS score based on how prepared you are. So that's a free resource. I encourage people to check it out, especially with the training. I think it's really good if you're just getting started. NIST also has resources. NIST is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, as part of the federal government, and it provides free resources as well. So it has the standards themselves, the NIST SP 800-171 and SP 800-171A that Rick mentioned. It also has scoring guides and self-assessment worksheets. So there's a lot of documentation on NIST website that you probably ought to check out as well, and all of that is free to download. You also can and should read through the NIST 800-171A, the assessment version. I'm just going to say it that way. It's like the expanded version of the requirements that breaks down each of the 110 requirements into specific objectives, like each part of the sentence. That's how I look at it. It's almost, Rick has talked about it before, like outlining a sentence back in school. For those who are old enough to know, to have gone through that fun experience in English class. But 171 kind of breaks down the sentence, breaks down the requirement into a number of objectives. Sometimes 3 or 5 or 7 different parts of the requirement are spelled out in 171A. Think of that as the assessor's checklist. So if you really want to know what the assessor is going to look for, then you'll want to read through 171A. Again, a free download, but it does take some time to work through, certainly. Those are the 171A is what C3PAOs use to conduct the CMMC certifications. So you're again kind of getting a jump start on that. Now, for some companies, the idea of learning all these requirements, studying all this information, learning all the technologies, implementing those, paying the money to upgrade your network, it may seem like overkill, and maybe it is overkill, especially if your company isn't doing 100% DoD work. In other words, if only a portion of your business is related to a defense contract, then you need to be thinking clearly about scoping your certification. In other words, narrowing down what needs to be certified, where the CUI, where that documentation is going to live. For many companies, they want to have an alternative plan. They don't want to upgrade their whole network. It's too complicated, too expensive. So they look for an alternative. I mentioned shortcut earlier. That's probably not a good way to convey the approach. But there are systems called enclaves. We sell a system called the Core Vault. It's a cloud-based platform that is built to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements and help your company be certified. It would be an alternative place to keep that documentation. It's in a vault, that's our name for it, right? That keeps it off of your network and off your company, your employees' computers, and off your company servers, and it's separated so that what the C3PAO assessment would be looking at is checking to make sure that the vault is secure, which will assure that. And then if your company's using it properly and you properly trained your employees, that's the shortcut I meant to indicate earlier. The shorter path, I guess, is the way to say it. But that's going to work for some companies to use a third-party product like an enclave and kind of avoid all the upgrades necessary on your network. That doesn't mean you don't want to be secure. It's just meeting all those requirements for the DoD is very stringent, and your certification can rest on it. And sometimes using a third-party product like Core Vault can be helpful. So that's just something to consider as we're talking about tools and resources that are available.
Okay, we had a question about the tools, so I've mentioned that we will send them as a follow-up. We'll send the links out to the
Yeah,
group.
great.
So, okay, so let's dig into the gaps a little bit more. Rick, in your experience, what are the most common deficiencies? Something good to know here. Things
Yeah.
that companies and how can they begin on closing those gaps effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. And over the years, there's a number of gaps that have been common gaps. I think the first one in the list that comes to mind is they do not have MFA, the multi-factor authentication. So what that is, it means that you have your username, password, and then you have yet another method to secure or provide information. It could be a series of numbers that you get from your cell phone or something like that. There's that third factor that you have to add. It just increases the security, and it makes it less likely somebody can hack into your system. So when we look at MFA, most of the time, I'd say a lot of times they don't have anything. If they do have multi-factor authentication, it's not across their entire network. It may be for a few things, but the requirement is to have it through all of your applications within your system, your organizational system. I'd say the second one that I see common is the lack of documentation. Nothing's documented. They may be doing the right things, and it's in one person's head, if you will, but if something happens to that individual, you lose all that technical knowledge, all that information. Things like policies. How do you handle different situations within your organization that meets these requirements? It could be procedures. So you want to be very careful in documenting really everything that you do within this secured environment. I would say the next area would be poor access control. What we mean by that is we haven't really identified who a basic user was, who would be an advanced user, who would have admin privileges, and all that is based on what you need to have do your job. You don't want to give any more access than what an individual employee would need to do their job. So you certainly don't want to have just everybody have full access that they can install any application they want. We want to think through who needs to have what access. So once again, that is one of the key requirements of the NIST and CMMC, having that access control, identifying who has what privileges. I think the next thing would be weak or no logging and monitoring of your system. One of the big heavy lifts is monitoring everything that goes on in your network and logging it and addressing it. All that becomes really important when if we have a security issue that comes up for forensic activity to identify what exactly happened and how do we stop bad things from happening from bad actors or whatever it might be. The logging is another very important thing. If some of this can be automated, some of the logs get very detailed, and to look at them on a day-to-day basis is very difficult. But one of the things that is a weakness there is the logging and monitoring of activity within your network. I think the last weakness that we see, or most common area, is dealing with backups. Backups need to be encrypted because if anyone would get a hold of that information, if you don't have it encrypted, you've just given away the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. You want to make sure it is encrypted so that if somehow it falls into the inappropriate hands, they wouldn't be able to read that. And then along with that, some companies do have backups. It is encrypted, but they neglect to test the backup to make sure that I can restore it. So if I have some kind of event that took place, I have the ability then that I can actually restore that. And so that takes planning and time to make sure we address all those areas that are critical for your organization to protect that CUI, that controlled unclassified information. So those are some of the things that I've noticed are deficiencies in many organizations.
It's a great list, Rick. And I assume, folks want to start with the high-risk areas first, like MFA.
Yeah, you want to start with looking at these areas that would provide the biggest detriment to your organization. Sure. But yeah, I'd start with the MFA, absolutely.
Okay. So then the next step is to build a compliance framework to address all these deficiencies and everything else. So this includes documentation, technical controls, and your internal processes. So Scott, what kinds of documentation are absolutely essential when preparing for the CMMC audit?
Yeah, let me put documentation. I'm going to break it down a little bit from what Rick shared there into some more detail. So think about it in three buckets, if you will. The first is policies, and policies are kind of the high level of documentation. It explains what you are doing to meet the requirements of the standard. So it's all the different, you're addressing the different controls that are in the NIST 800-171. You're describing the tools you're using, the methods you're using, the approach you're taking, and that establishes policy for your organization to operate securely and in compliance with the standard. Now, it would probably be unrealistic and probably inefficient to think about developing 110 policies, like one for each control. So grouping them by topic or grouping them by family. You'll find when you read the 800-171 standard, it's organized into families or sections, topics, if you will. There's 16 families. Many companies will have 16 policies, and in each policy explain how they're meeting the controls in that group of requirements there. So policies are kind of step one, and by developing your policies, you're really planning out how you're going to meet each of the requirements specifically, what tools and techniques you're going to use, that type of thing. A second group of documentation, we'll put it as procedures. And so procedures, there's no specific number of procedures you have to have. Now, I believe there's one or two references in the standard where it spells out that procedures are necessary. But for the most part, they're kind of as needed. In other words, if you have an activity or a process or some kind of a annual test that you're going to run, Rick was talking earlier about backup tests, that kind of thing. Then you might want to write out procedures so you remember how you're going to do each step along the way. So they're really for your purpose, but once you develop procedures, then you need to follow them, because it's presumed that if it's important enough to document, it's important enough to follow. So that would be part of your assessment. But procedures can be helpful. I just wouldn't go overboard with developing. And then the third large group of documentation I'll call evidence, and that proves that you're actually following the requirements, that your system is secure, and that it's tracking the right things, and it's staying up to date, all those kind of things. So let me give some examples of evidence so for example, a simple one would be training records. So there's a requirement that you train your employees on security and the procedures that you're using within your organization. Well, how do we know your employees were trained? Well, because you'll have records that they were trained, that kind of thing. There's an example that would be fairly simple. Now, a more complicated bit of evidence would be the logs that Rick talked about. So every device that operates electronically on your network is keeping track of, or should be, I'll say it that way, should be keeping track of all the actions and all the activities, whether it's activities from a keyboard and a mouse or your thumbs, if it's on your cell phone, whatever. And then there are automated systems that go on behind the scenes. There are people, maybe legitimately accessing your network. There are people signing in, signing out, all these different activities going on. All that information is logged, and those logs are evidence of compliance because you're required to keep those logs active. And then the monitoring of the logs, which can be done through a system called a SIM, Security Incident and Event Management. I believe that's what that refers to. But that's a system that helps you monitor your logs. Well, that would be, again, another example of evidence that's showing that you're, in fact, monitoring your logs. Another one might be vendor documentation. So systems that you use that are in the cloud, for example, let's take maybe Microsoft 365. So just a note that if you're using the cloud-based Microsoft platform, you'll need to look for the GCC or GCC high versions of those. Those meet the requirements of CMMC. The commercial versions don't meet the requirements of CMMC, so just be aware of that. But my point is that any cloud system that you're using, like Microsoft's, that cloud platform has to be approved to meet what's called FedRAMP requirements. It's a different requirement, much more stringent than CMMC, but you're not allowed to put CUI in the cloud on a platform that isn't compliant with FedRAMP. So what does that mean for you? It means you have to have some documentation showing that any cloud systems you're using meet FedRAMP requirements. There are other vendor requirements as well that you need to keep track of. But again, this is evidence. So Suzanne, there's a numerous list of things that have to be tracked. So I know we're introducing layers of complexity here, right? So you have to understand the requirements. You have to determine where you stand with your pre-assessment. You have to implement all these requirements. You have to document all these requirements. You have to monitor that you're keeping up with all these requirements. You have to upgrade your network. I mean, it gets a little tiresome. I'm just saying, especially for small companies, which is what Core Business Solutions focuses on. I imagine there are a lot of small companies in our audience today, and they're thinking, I don't even have an IT guy. How am I going to do this? Which is where those shortcuts really help.
Yeah, sounds a lot like, any other version of compliance that you have to adhere
Yes,
to.
it does.
Policies, procedures, evidence, kind of a triangle of documentation that you have to have in place.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Yeah.
So Rick, let's shift a little bit to the technical side. So where should companies start when prioritizing their technical controls? So especially if they're short on time or resources.
Good question. So we've been talking a little bit about MFA, the multi-factor authentication, and that's a good place to start, as we've mentioned several times here. And you just think of all the different areas that would impact. So think of remote access, whether it's a VPN or remote desktop. You want to make sure that there is multi-factor authentication applied there. Think about all of your cloud applications that you might have on your system. You'd want to, once again, have multi-factor authentication there. Things like email, you don't think about necessarily, but once again, you want to have the multi-factor deployed on that. And absolutely, you'll want to have that multi-factor authentication for any kind of admin access or systems. You just don't want the possibility of somebody coming in with administrative rights into your system. So once again, the multi-factor authentication is a good place to start and to harden your system a little bit more. We talked a little bit about role-based access. And so once again, it is critical that we limit access to only those areas that an individual needs access to. Setting up group policies, for example, so that we have a group policy that establishes a standard or a basic user. And maybe you have an advanced user that can do a few more things or have access to a couple of your tools that the average employee might not need. Maybe it would be your ERP system or even your accounting system. So people would need a little bit higher ability to access those as their job responsibilities increase. And then absolutely you should have a fewer number of individuals that would have admin privileges. So you want to set up those access controls, those privileges, so that the appropriate people have appropriate access. If you have everybody that has admin accesses, there's really nothing secure in your system. We talked about backups, and once again, backups are critical. If you ever have ransomware or anything like that, you want to be able to have a good backup that you can restore from, because the adage, time is money. You know, you can't waste hours and days to restore your system. So you want to make sure that you have those backups. Those backups are secured. And you even think about off-premise. You might want to store things off-premise because if you have a natural disaster, fire, flooding, depending on your locale, maybe a tornado, things like that, you want to make sure that you have a safe place where you can go and retrieve that. Once again, maybe it's in the cloud, but once again, as Scott pointed out, there's that FedRAMP moderate requirement that has to be met if you're storing data in the cloud. So it adds a little bit of complexity depending what you're doing and how you're protecting that CUI. And then, you know, there is that whole monitoring aspect and auditing aspect. And Scott talked about the SIMs. That is a way to have an application that is reviewing the logs for you, summarizing it. They have algorithms that can go through that. If you've ever looked at an event log, you know, thousands and thousands of lines of information. So there are tools out there that will help streamline that information so that it only picks out those things that it identifies as being potentially threatening or problematic. Along with that, sometimes there's a SOC or a third party that is monitoring your logs for you. They can do it a lot faster than you can in most cases. And then associated with that, you know, establishing alerts so that if there is an issue that comes up, somebody gets an email that they can follow up on that. And you're notified that, hey, there's a suspicious activity, or hey, your system's down, or whatever that might be. So alerts, you know, having some kind of an automated alert that will notify you that there's a problem. So once again, make sure that you work on those things, that you have backup plans, maintain your backups, you know, maybe 60, 90 days worth of information, logs too, when we're talking about these logs that you're keeping, 60, 90 days worth of logs that you recycle them, especially if there has to be any kind of investigation that takes place. We need to have enough information that we can identify what happened and prevent it from happening again.
Okay, great. We've been getting some questions as we go through today, and some I'm saving for the end, but because we were just talking about logging, we did have one question that says, you know, will logging and monitoring identify other potential gaps? You know, is that kind of a good place to start?
The logging, the purpose of the logging is to identify all the activities that are taking place on your system. It could identify gaps if it's showing that an individual was able to penetrate your system.
Okay.
Yeah, then you have a gap there that you'd have to resolve. So a lot of times that's true. If there's a
Okay.
bad actor or information gets inappropriately accessed, yeah, it would show some deficiencies or gaps, if you will.
Okay, great. So why are there certain controls like access control, MFA, system logging, why are they considered foundational across all levels of CMMC? Scott, can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if I can do better than Rick just did because he did a great job with it. Access control, as was mentioned, puts every bit of information, every part of your network on a need-to-know basis. So that's the key, is that you start with, just kind of a mental exercise, if you will, imagining no employee, no manager, no outside party has any access to anything in your network. Well, that isn't going to be functional, right? So you're going to need to start to open up or give access to certain individuals to be able to do certain things. And so if you think about it from that point of view, then you can understand that you're really just saying, I'm going to keep the doors locked in our building, and I'm going to issue certain keys to certain people who need to access certain rooms, using an analogy there. So that's certainly foundational. MFA is that extra test to make sure that you are who you say you are. Usernames and passwords can be, compromised, but if you have a third way to identify yourself, I know in some cases, I log into my laptop in the morning and it wants to look at my face. It's got facial recognition. If I log into my cell phone, there are certain things that I do on there that require me to put my thumb, and it'll read my thumbprint. There are other cases when I have to implement a code or give a code that's on an app on my phone. So all of those methods, and there are more, provide a third test to make sure you are who you are, and you can imagine how important that is, that you ensure that only authorized people are accessing your network. And then, as Rick mentioned, logging is key because of the real-time notices. If you're set up properly, the real-time notices that you can get that there may be a problem. But it also gives you a record of what did happen if you're trying to trace back to see why a certain thing happened, or if in fact it really was a problem. If you don't have those detailed records on all your devices easily accessible, you'd be nearly impossible to trace back what really happened and why was there a breach, or why was there access when it shouldn't have been.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So moving on here a little bit, let's assume a company has built out its framework and has addressed some major gaps. So the next big step is in understanding the certification path. So Rick, how can a company determine whether it'll need a third-party assessment or if a self-attestation will suffice?
Okay, good question again. So the first question you want to ask is, do you handle CUI, that controlled, unclassified information? Keep in mind, that is all the DoD is concerned about. They don't care about anything other than that CUI, that controlled, unclassified information. So I asked the question, do you have CUI? If you say yes, then you know that you're going to have a third-party assessment done at a level 2. That would be your level 2. And then for special cases, a level 3 if you have really sensitive information or sensitive CUI. If you answer no, then you might be required to have a level 1, which is a self-assessment. Level 1 applies basically to FCI, that federal contracting information. That's comprised of 17 basic cybersecurity controls, whereas the CUI, the level 2, requires that there's 110. And then the level 3 has another 20-some controls on top of that. So once again, that helps you identify, do I have access, or am I going to have CUI or maybe FCI?
Right. Okay. So there's often some confusion about what can be deferred and what can't. So Scott, can you clarify what's allowed under POAMs and whether there's any flexibility for waivers?
Yeah, let me distinguish between pre-CMMC and post-CMMC, because I think that's important. Today, if you're implementing a SPURS score, you can defer meeting some of the requirements. In other words, you're in progress getting yourself toward that 110 score. And so by definition, you've got some things that aren't quite done, and there's no harm, no foul, because the requirement is that you implement a score and you continue to try to work to improve it. Once you are approaching CMMC certification, then the flexibility starts to really diminish dramatically. And in fact, in a CMMC certification, there are only a very few controls that are permitted to be added to what's called a POAM, or Plan of Action, a milestone. In other words, that you can correct after the audit. Most of the controls, if they're not in place, then could lead to a failed certification, which you really don't want to go through that because you end up paying for it twice. So I would say, very minimal flexibility in what could be deferred with CMMC. And that's really, everyone's got to be heading toward getting all the requirements in place.
Absolutely. Okay. So finally, in this section, let's talk about realistic planning. So Rick, what's your advice on setting a timeline for certification? So how can companies avoid getting caught in a scheduling crunch?
Good question again. Lots of good questions today. Well, you can expect that, it will take anywhere from 6 to 18 months to implement this plan and carry it from start to finish. The first point that you want to do is do a gap assessment where we are looking at each and every control and identifying, are we meeting that control or aren't we meeting that control? Or maybe we're partially meeting that control, so that we can identify what our gaps are, sometimes referred to those POAMs, those Plan of Actions and Milestones. So when we identify what those gaps are, it's important to associate a time frame for that. If we don't plan to resolve something, it probably won't get done. So it's okay if we change our timeline for that, but we put our best foot forward and say, okay, I hope to have this resolved in X amount of time or on such and such a date. So once again, you're doing that gap assessment, finding out where all those issues may be and putting a plan together to resolve those issues. Then you are going to actually go through a remediation phase, is addressing those gaps that you have. And as you're addressing those gaps, once again, you're documenting all this information. You definitely document what you have in place. You want to say, okay, not yes, I have it in place. You want to say, what do you have in place? And then for the POAM, what do I plan to do to resolve that issue? So that would be the next plan of action here for you, that remediation and documentation side of it. And then you want to continually do an internal review, looking at your areas again, reviewing those. You may have to work with your MSP, because maybe some of the controls you don't understand how to meet those. And once again, those are variables that can add to your overall time. When I bring a third party in as say, for instance, an MSP, now I'm working with them and they have to do some fact finding. And so there might be some back and forth there that could introduce some delays in your plan. So keep that in mind as well. And then you have your scheduling for your assessment. You've done an assessment or a self-assessment. Maybe you've went through a pre-assessment. and now you're looking to do your certification assessment. And that means that you have to get in contact with a C3PAO. Understand that, that could delay your project, getting them, because they are right now probably busy. There's not a lot of them out there. It's a limited pool, but be aware of that and work that into your plan, understanding that, maybe when you're ready, the instant that you're ready, you might have to delay a little bit till their schedule frees up. So once again, there could be some delays there when you're putting together your plan. Once again, you want to keep all those things in mind. Things like mock assessments could take you about a month. Just avoid rushing through it. Make sure you do due diligence. Make sure that you're thorough in your review, in your preparation to get ready for that assessment and that contact with the assessor. You don't want to go into hiring a C3PAO only to find out you're not ready, and then you've wasted all that time and money. So do due diligence up front, make sure you're ready for that. So that's kind of the step. Do your gap remediation, internal reviews, schedule your assessments. All those things are good steps to follow, and then achieve your certification.
Awesome. All right, that's a great roadmap. Very helpful, Rick. So I'm trying to watch time here, as I should. But let's wrap up with some really practical takeaways. So Scott, what should companies do in the next 30, 60, 90 days to build momentum and then to move closer to certification?
Yeah, I think getting started, if you haven't started, having kind of a jumpstart plan in place, 30, 60, 90 is a good one. If you haven't implemented your SPUR score, you haven't done a self-assessment, you don't know where you stand in terms of the 110 points, that would be the place to start. And as I mentioned, Project Spectrum and NIST websites have tools that you can use to conduct that assessment and determine your SPUR score. That would be kind of step one, a good thing to get done in the next month or so. Secondly, hit those high return controls and protections, as Rick mentioned, the MFA, controlled access. Get working on your policies and start to determine how you're going to meet the requirements in CMMC. And then finalize your plan, say in 90 days, how you're going to close all those gaps, and put a time frame in mind that leads toward being prepared for a third-party assessment. If you're looking for a level 2 or level 3 certification, if it's level 1, then you're getting everything in place to meet the 17 practices required, and that would be spelled out in your contract if you need level 1. But if you're a manufacturer and you're dealing with any sort of documentation, drawings and specifications and test plans and those type of things, then all of that is CUI, and you should be aiming for a level 2 certification. But I think getting a really good plan in place, Suze, is the first place to start.
That seems smart. So in that same vein, Rick, for companies with limited budgets and smaller teams, what's your top advice on preparing smart? So not overspending, not over-engineering things.
Right. I would say you want to look at what area is of my highest risk, and address that first. If I have a risky area that could impact my organization, I want to focus on that first as I'm trying to resolve issues. Maybe an enclave, as Scott mentioned, is a good solution. Maybe as a permanent solution, or maybe an interim solution to implementing your entire network. We have clients that do both there, but an enclave can help you get compliant quicker, and then allowing you to, if you want to bring an entire network into compliance, you could do that as well. And once again, it depends on your needs, what you might need as an organization. Then you have leveraging resources. We talked about a number of those. resources that the Apex accelerators bring. Scott mentioned Project Spectrum. There are a lot of resources out there. Just go look for those and utilize those tools to help you achieve that. And as Scott has said, and we've heard many times here, start now. Start working on getting compliant, putting your tools in place, evaluating where you are and what your needs are. Put that plan together. Document things so that you know where you are and where you need to go.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, guys. I do have a couple questions here. Let me pick one or two that seem really relevant. One is somebody they've got their scores ready, but what's the proper DoD site to go to upload the scores? Can we provide some advice on that?
There is a PIEE website, and you would log into that PIEE website. I don't have the URL for that, but if you do a search, a Google PIEE, it will take you into that website. If you already have a PIEE account, then you would request access to the SPURS database. If you don't have a PIEE, you'll have to get that first, then you'll request access for the SPURS database.
Somebody helped us out here and said your Apex Accelerator can help you with PIEE and SPURS as well.
That's right.
Thank you, Melissa. One other quick observation from Richard, that he's basically saying that he's seeing that this requirement doesn't apply for COTS products, so commercial off-the-shelf products. Have we seen anything about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's true, Suzanne.
Okay.
This is, if it's a commercial off-the-shelf products and that's what you're selling to the government, then you're going to find that that is excluded from these requirements. So that's a true statement.
Okay,
Good
great.
catch.
Correct.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for today. Thanks, guys. And thanks again to everyone for joining us today. We hope this session gave you a clearer understanding of what it takes to get ready for CMMC certification and how to take those first important steps. So whether you're just starting your journey or already in the middle of remediation, having a roadmap can make all the difference. And as a reminder, the key is to start now. Complete your SPURS score, identify your gaps, begin implementing core controls like MFA and backups and access control, and document. And if you need help, reach out to your local Apex Accelerator or MEP. They're here to support your efforts. And of course, you can always reach out to us, Core Business Solutions, as we're always available to assist with gap assessments, policy development, and readiness strategies, along with our cloud-based Core Vault. Before we close, be sure to register for our May webinar, CMMC Made Affordable, Budgeting and Enclaving Tips. And in that session, we'll explore how to scope your network and more strategically reduce your compliance costs and make smart budgeting decisions, especially for small businesses with limited resources. So be sure to check out our webpage and YouTube channel for content that may help you in your journey to CMMC certification. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next month.